Have you ever seen a person standing in a place they once loved, but suddenly they don't feel like they belong there anymore? Same place, same people, same life. But something inside them quietly changes, like their heart is being pulled in a direction they cannot see or explain. And the strange part is, nothing bad is happening to them, but they can't enjoy what they used to enjoy anymore. If you've ever felt this strange shift inside you, like your heart is quietly moving away from everything familiar, comment "strange feeling," because what you're experiencing is not ordinary, and what it means will shock you. When Allah quietly pulls you out of comfort, without explaining why. There is a strange phase in life that does not feel like a blessing in the beginning. Everything around you still looks normal, but your heart starts reacting differently to what used to feel easy. You are still in the same place, still living the same life, still doing the same things, but something inside you is no longer fully resting there. You try to ignore it. You try to convince yourself that nothing has changed. You keep yourself busy so you do not have to think about it. But deep down you feel it clearly. The comfort you once depended on is no longer holding your heart the same way. It feels lighter, emptier, almost temporary in a way you never noticed before. And this is where it becomes confusing. Because nothing bad has happened, yet your heart is no longer the same. You start asking silent questions. Why do I not enjoy what I used to enjoy? Why does everything feel slightly off? Why do I feel like I am present in life but not fully inside it? This is not random. This is not emotional confusion. This is Allah shifting your direction without announcing it to anyone. Because when Allah wants to elevate a servant, He does not always start by adding something new. Sometimes He starts by quietly removing the deep attachment you had to what was keeping you still. Comfort is dangerous when it makes you stop growing. Comfort is dangerous when it makes you forget your purpose. Comfort is dangerous when it makes you delay your return to Allah. So Allah begins a process that you do not notice at first. He makes your heart less attached to what distracted you. He makes your satisfaction slightly weaker in things that used to fully satisfy you. He makes your emotions less dependent on environments that kept you spiritually asleep. Not suddenly, but slowly, so gently that only someone paying attention will notice. And that is why most people miss this moment. They think they are just changing mood. They think they are just growing out of things. But in reality, Allah's pulling them out of a version of life that was keeping their soul too comfortable to change. And here is where the tension starts to grow inside you. You are still living your life, but something inside you is no longer fully agreeing with it. You sit with people, but your heart feels distant. You do things, but they do not fill you the same way. You try to return to old habits, old distractions, old routines, but something inside quietly resists. And now you are standing in a strange place. Not fully changed, but no longer the same. Not fully guided yet, but no longer fully lost. Caught in between what you used to be and what you are slowly becoming. And this is the part most people do not understand. This uncomfortable feeling is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It is a sign that something is changing within you. Allah does not always announce your growth with ease. Sometimes He begins your elevation by removing your attachment to ease itself. So when you feel that quiet dissatisfaction, when comfort no longer feels like comfort, when your heart starts searching for something it cannot name yet, do not rush to fill that emptiness with more distraction, because that feeling is not asking you to escape. It is asking you to wake up. And what comes next in this journey is even deeper than what you are feeling right now. When everything you used to escape into starts feeling empty, There comes a point in life when something very quiet changes inside you, but you cannot explain it to anyone around you. On the outside, everything still looks the same. Your habits are still there, your routines are still there, your distractions are still available, and your daily life has not dramatically shifted. But inside, something is no longer responding the same way. You try to return to the things that used to make you forget your stress. You go back to your usual distractions, your usual escapes, your usual sources of temporary comfort. But this time, something feels different. You are there, but you are not fully there. You are watching, but you are not fully engaged. You are scrolling, but nothing is truly holding your attention the way it used to. And the strange part is, you notice it slowly. At first, you think maybe you are just tired, maybe you are stressed, maybe you just need rest. So you keep going back, you keep repeating the same patterns, expecting the same feeling to return. But it does not return in the same way. It feels lighter, weaker, less satisfying. Not completely gone, but no longer powerful enough to hold your heart. And this is where confusion begins. Because nothing external has changed enough to explain what you are feeling internally. But your heart already knows something is shifting. This is not boredom in the normal sense. This is not simple emotional fatigue. This is something deeper that most people do not recognize until much later. This is Allah slowly removing the weight your heart used to carry on things that were never meant to fulfill you. Because there are things in life that do not look harmful on the surface, but they quietly keep the heart attached to what is temporary. They keep the mind busy but the soul asleep. They fill time but empty meaning. And when Allah wants to elevate a person, He does not always take them out of those things instantly. Instead, He changes how the heart interacts with them. So the same thing that once felt engaging now feels hollow. The same thing that once felt exciting now feels repetitive. The same thing that once made you forget everything now cannot even fully hold your attention for a few minutes without your mind drifting away. And this is where something important starts happening inside you. You begin to notice the after feeling. Even if you still go back to those distractions, even if you still fall into old habits, there is something that follows you afterward. A kind of quiet heaviness, a kind of inner silence that feels different from peace. It is not loud guilt, but it is not comfort either. It is a subtle awareness that something is not aligning with your inner state anymore. And this awareness is not random. This is the beginning of sensitivity in your heart. Because when a heart is fully distant from Allah, it does not feel the difference between harmful and harmless distractions. It treats everything the same. It consumes everything without reflection. It moves from one thing to another without inner resistance. But when Allah begins to pull a person back, that sensitivity slowly returns. At first, it is very small, almost unnoticeable. You only feel it after everything is over, after the distraction ends, after the noise stops, after you are alone again. That is when the silence feels heavier than before. And in that silence, something begins to form. You start questioning your own patterns. You start wondering why things that used to feel normal now leave you feeling empty. You start noticing that the problem is not just the thing itself, but the effect it leaves behind inside your heart. And this is where the deeper truth begins to unfold. Allah is not just removing pleasure from your distractions. He is removing your dependency on them. Because as long as a person is fully satisfied with everything temporary, they will never feel the need to look beyond it. But when that satisfaction starts to fade, the heart naturally begins to search. And searching is the beginning of return. But this process does not feel beautiful in the beginning. It feels like loss. It feels like disconnection. It feels like something is missing from your life, even though everything is still present. You may even try to fill that gap by increasing the same habits, increasing the same distractions, increasing the same noise. But instead of satisfaction increasing, the emptiness becomes more noticeable. Because now the heart is no longer easily convinced. And this is the part where many people may understand what is happening inside them. They assume they are becoming more bored with life. They assume they are losing interest in everything. They assume something is wrong with their motivation or mindset. But in reality, something deeper is being adjusted. Allah is reducing the illusion that temporary things can fully satisfy a heart that was created for something greater. And once that illusion weakens, the heart enters a very uncomfortable stage. A stage where nothing fully satisfies, but nothing has fully replaced it either. This is the in-between state. You are still attached to old habits, but no longer fully satisfied by them. You are still participating in old routines, but no longer fully present in them. You are still going back to the same distractions, but something inside you is quietly stepping away even while your body is still there. And this is where the internal tension becomes strongest. Because now you are no longer fully lost in distraction, but you are not yet fully connected to something higher either. You are in a space where your heart is being loosened from one side, but not yet fully held by the other. And this space feels uncomfortable. It feels like emptiness. It feels like confusion. It feels like something is wrong, even though nothing is actually wrong in the way you think. But this is exactly where transformation begins. Because a heart that is fully satisfied with everything it consumes will never move. But a heart that starts feeling emptiness after consumption begins to wake up. It begins to question. It begins to reflect. It begins to slow down. And in that slowing down, awareness starts to grow. And awareness is the first step back to Allah. At this stage, you might not understand what is happening. You might not have clear answers. You might not be able to explain your feelings properly. But something inside you is already shifting direction. You are no longer blindly running toward everything that distracts you. You are starting to notice what it leaves behind. You are starting to feel the difference between temporary escape and lasting peace. You are starting to realize that not everything you run to actually carries anything for your heart. And even though this realization is still forming, it changes how you experience everything. Because once the heart becomes aware, it cannot fully go back to ignorance. And this is why this stage feels so intense internally. Because you are not who you used to be, but you are also not fully who you are becoming yet. You are in a transition that no one else can see, but you can feel every moment of it. And that is why it feels so personal. It is between you and your heart, between you and your awareness, between you and the one who is quietly guiding you without forcing you. And if you are feeling this right now, understand something very clearly. This emptiness is not a punishment. It is not a sign that your life is getting worse. It is a sign that Allah is making your heart less dependent on what was never meant to carry it. Because what comes next is not more distraction. What comes next is direction, when Allah removes people, so you can hear yourself again. There is a phase in life that feels like people are still around you, but something inside your experience of them begins to change. You still talk, you still meet, you still interact, but the connection does not feel the same as it used to. The depth is not the same. The emotional weight is not the same. Even the conversations that once felt meaningful now feel lighter, almost distant in a way you cannot fully explain. And you start noticing something very quiet but very real. You are becoming more alone, even when you are not physically alone. At first, you might think this is just a phase of mood or personality change. You might think you are becoming distant or emotionally tired. You might even try to force yourself back into old levels of social connection, trying to recreate what once felt natural. But it does not fully return the way it used to. Because this is not about people changing, this is about you changing. And not in a negative way, but in a deeper way that most people only understand later. This is Allah slowly removing external noise so your internal voice becomes clearer again. Because when a person is constantly surrounded by voices, opinions, conversations, and emotional input, they often lose clarity about themselves. They start living based on reactions instead of reflection. They start thinking based on influence instead of awareness. They start feeling based on environment instead of inner truth. And without realizing it, they become disconnected from their own heart. So when Allah wants to elevate a person spiritually, He does not always add more people or more activity. Sometimes He reduces the noise, not to isolate you in a harmful way, but to realign you in a necessary way. And this is where the experience becomes uncomfortable, because silence with people around you feels different than silence when you are completely alone. You can still be in gatherings, still be in conversations, still be present in social spaces, but internally, you feel like something is pulling you inward. Your attention is no longer fully outside. Your awareness is shifting inside, and this shift is not accidental. It is guidance taking shape in a very quiet form. Because Allah knows something very important about the human heart. A heart that is always filled with external input never fully learns how to process internal truth. It becomes dependent on constant distraction from its own thoughts. It avoids reflection. It avoids self-awareness. It avoids deeper questions. So Allah begins to gently reduce what is around you so that what is within you becomes louder than what is outside you. And this is where the real transformation begins. Because in the beginning, you may feel like something is missing. You may feel like people are drifting, or conversations are fading, or emotional closeness is reducing. But slowly, something else starts happening in return. You start hearing yourself more clearly, not just your thoughts, but your real thoughts. The ones you used to ignore, the ones you used to push aside, the ones you were too busy to notice, the ones that were always there, but never fully heard. And in that silence, reflection starts to grow. You start thinking about your life differently. You start noticing patterns you ignored before. You start understanding your reactions more deeply. You start seeing parts of yourself that were always present, but never fully acknowledged. And this is where awareness begins to rise. But awareness is not always comfortable in the beginning. Because when you start hearing yourself honestly, you also start noticing things you were avoiding, regrets you did not fully process, choices you never reflected on, emotional wounds you never properly understood, situations you distracted yourself from instead of healing from. And now, without the same level of distraction around you, you are left with yourself, not to punish you, but to heal you, because healing cannot happen in constant noise. Healing requires moments where nothing is covering the truth inside you. And that is exactly what Allah begins to create for you in this phase. And this is where many people misunderstand isolation. They think it is loneliness. They think it is rejection. They think it is disconnection from life. But in reality, it is often a redirection from dependence on creation to dependence on the Creator. Because people are not meant to carry your entire emotional world. And when you depend too heavily on them, your heart becomes unstable. It rises and falls based on their presence, their attention, their words, their validation. So Allah gently reduces that attachment, not by taking people away completely, but by changing your internal reliance on them. And as that reliance weakens, something else starts to grow inside you. Self-awareness, clarity, reflection, and slowly, a deeper connection with Allah that does not depend on external noise. But this process does not feel peaceful in the beginning. It feels unfamiliar, because you are used to filling silence with something. You are used to responding to messages. You are used to being surrounded. You are used to emotional exchange. And now, even when those things are present, they do not fully occupy your heart the way they used to. Something inside you is shifting attention elsewhere. And this is where you begin to understand something important. Allah is not removing people to punish you. He is removing dependency. Because if your heart is fully attached to people, it becomes distracted from the one who created both you and them. And Allah never wants your heart to become trapped in what is temporary. So He gently loosens that attachment. Sometimes through distance, sometimes through emotional changes, sometimes through reduced connection, and sometimes simply through changing how your heart experiences those connections. And in this space, something very subtle begins to happen. You start becoming more honest with yourself. You start asking deeper questions. You start reflecting without being forced to reflect. And this is where growth becomes real. Because growth is not just learning new things. Growth is also unlearning dependency on things that were never meant to define you. And when people become quieter in your life, your inner world becomes louder. And in that louder inner world, you start noticing something that was always there, but never fully recognized. Your need for guidance, your need for direction, your need for stability that does not change with people. And slowly, without you even realizing it fully, your heart starts turning back. Not always in big emotional moments, but in quiet realizations, in small thoughts, in silent reflections, in moments where you are alone and suddenly feel the truth more clearly than before. And this is where Allah begins to rebuild you. Not through noise, not through crowds, but through clarity. And if you are in this stage right now, understand something very carefully. You are not being forgotten. You are being refined. Because sometimes Allah removes what surrounds you so that what is within you finally becomes strong enough to stand on its own and return to Him without distraction. When your heart starts rejecting what it once ignored, there is a moment in your life when something very quiet changes inside you, and at first you do not even realize its importance. You are still the same person on the outside. Your routine has not completely changed. Your surroundings are still familiar. But your heart begins reacting differently to things it used to ignore without thinking. What once felt normal now feels different inside you. Not always loud, not always obvious, but noticeable in a way you cannot fully explain to others. You might see something you used to see every day, hear something you used to hear without care, or fall into a habit you once considered normal, and suddenly your heart responds with a kind of heaviness or discomfort afterward. Not always immediately, but later, when everything becomes quiet again, and you start questioning yourself. Why do I feel like this now? Why is my heart reacting differently? Why does something that used to feel light now feel heavy? This is not confusion. And this is not weakness. This is awareness returning to your heart. Because when a person stays distant from reflection for a long time, they stop noticing the difference between right and wrong in an emotional sense. They may still know it logically, but the heart becomes less sensitive. Things feel normal even when they are not aligned. Actions feel routine even when they are not healthy. Choices feel acceptable even when they are not good for the soul. But when Allah wants to elevate a person spiritually, He begins to restore that sensitivity. And this restoration does not always feel comfortable, because awareness brings responsibility, and responsibility brings discomfort. So what happens is very subtle. You do not suddenly become perfect. You do not suddenly leave everything wrong behind. Instead, your heart starts reacting afterward. It starts feeling the weight of what it could not feel before. It starts noticing what it used to ignore. It starts responding to things it once passed through without reflection. And this response is the beginning of change. Because a heart that feels nothing is a heart that cannot be guided easily. But a heart that feels discomfort is a heart that can still return. And this is one of the most important signs of spiritual life, not perfection, but sensitivity. And as this sensitivity increases, something inside you becomes more honest. You start recognizing patterns in your own behavior that you used to overlook. You start noticing how certain choices leave you feeling internally disturbed afterward. You start realizing that not everything you normalized was actually good for your heart. And this realization creates an internal conflict, because part of you is still attached to old habits, old environments, old ways of thinking, old patterns that feel familiar and easy. But another part of you is now waking up to the truth that not everything familiar is beneficial. And these two parts begin to struggle inside you. This struggle is not a sign that you are lost. It is a sign that you are in transition. Because growth always begins with internal conflict. If everything inside you agreed with your old state, nothing would ever change. But when your heart begins to disagree with your actions, even quietly, that disagreement becomes the starting point of transformation. And Allah does not rush this process. He lets it develop slowly so that your heart learns to recognize truth on its own, not through force, but through awareness. And that is why even your mistakes begin to feel different. Not every mistake leads to immediate change, but it no longer passes through your heart without leaving a trace. Something stays behind, a feeling, a reflection, a quiet discomfort that does not fully leave you the same as before. And this is where many people misunderstand what is happening to them. They think they are just becoming more emotional or more sensitive. But in reality, they are becoming more conscious. Because consciousness is when your heart no longer fully ignores what your actions create inside you. And this consciousness is one of the ways Allah guides a person back. Not by forcing them to stop everything at once, but by making them feel the weight of what they could not feel before. And once a heart starts feeling, it cannot remain unchanged for long. It may still struggle. It may still return to old patterns. It may still repeat what it is trying to leave. But it will no longer be the same repetition as before. Because now there is awareness inside it. And awareness always creates direction, even if the steps are slow. At this stage, you may also notice something else. You begin to feel more uncomfortable with things you once defended. You may even surprise yourself by how differently you think about your own past behavior. What once felt normal may now feel questionable. What once felt acceptable may now feel like something you need to rethink. And this is not self-hate. This is growth. Because growth is not only about adding good things. It is also about removing comfort from what was pulling you away from clarity. And Allah uses this discomfort as a gentle guide, not to shame you, but to realign you, so that your heart does not remain blind to what it is becoming. And if you are feeling this stage right now, understand something clearly. You are not falling apart. You are waking up. Because a heart that starts rejecting what it once ignored is a heart that is no longer asleep. When you start speaking to Allah, like you actually need Him. There is a moment in a person's life when something inside their relationship with Allah begins to change in a way they cannot fully explain. It is not sudden, it is not loud, it is not dramatic, but it is real. You begin to speak to Allah differently. Not because someone told you to, not because you learned something new, not because you suddenly became more knowledgeable, but because life itself starts shaping your heart into a different kind of honesty. At first, you might not notice it clearly. You still pray the same way. You still make dua the same way. You still go through the same actions. But something inside the feeling begins to shift. Your words are no longer just words. They start carrying weight. And that weight comes from need. Because when Allah begins to elevate a servant spiritually, one of the first things He strengthens inside them is awareness of dependence. Not dependence on people, not dependence on circumstances, but dependence on Him alone. And this awareness does not come in a comfortable way. It often comes through moments where everything else begins to feel uncertain. You start realizing slowly that there are things you cannot fix, situations you cannot control, outcomes you cannot guarantee, and emotions you cannot fully manage. And in that realization, something inside you starts turning in a direction it was not fully turning toward before. You start turning back to Allah with a different heart. Not a routine heart, not a distracted heart, but a heart that actually feels the weight of what it is asking for. And this is where your dua begins to change. You are no longer just repeating words. You are expressing something real. Sometimes you do not even have proper words. Sometimes your dua becomes silence. Sometimes it becomes tears. Sometimes it becomes thoughts that you cannot fully organize. But the connection becomes more honest than ever before. And this honesty is not something you forced. It is something life created inside you. Because when a person goes through enough confusion, enough uncertainty, enough emotional weight, they stop speaking to Allah as if they are distant from Him. They start speaking to Him as if He is the only one who truly understands what they are carrying. And that shift is very deep. Because now your relationship is no longer based only on habit. It is based on need. You start finding yourself turning to Allah in moments you never used to. Not only in prayer times, not only in structured moments, but in random silence, in sudden thoughts, in emotional heaviness that comes without warning. In situations where you realize you have nowhere else to place your heart. And this is where something very important begins to form inside you. Real connection, not emotional excitement, not temporary motivation, but real connection built on reliance. And this reliance changes how you experience everything else in life. Because when a heart starts depending on Allah more sincerely, it stops depending on everything else the same way it used to. People may still be around you, but your heart does not lean on them the same way. Plans may still exist, but your trust is no longer fully attached to them. Outcomes may still matter, but your emotional stability is no longer fully controlled by them. And this is not because you stopped caring. It is because your heart is being trained to care differently, more deeply, but more correctly. And in this stage, even your pain begins to change shape. You no longer just complain internally. You start turning it into conversation with Allah. You start expressing what you cannot express to people. You start opening things that you used to keep hidden. Not because it is easy, but because it becomes the only place where your heart feels understood. And this is one of the most beautiful shifts in a believer's life. When Allah becomes not just a concept in your mind, but a presence in your experience. But this stage is not always peaceful in the beginning, because when you start needing Allah more sincerely, you also become more aware. of how much you were relying on other things before, and that realization can feel heavy. You begin to see how much emotional weight you were placing on people, on expectations, on control, on certainty. And now that those supports feel weaker, you realize something important. They were never meant to carry your heart in the first place. So Allah slowly redirects your dependence, not by taking everything away at once, but by making you realize where your true stability actually comes from. And this realization slowly transforms your relationship with life. You still try, you still work, you still move forward, but your heart is no longer fully shaken by everything, because now there is a deeper anchor forming inside you. A quiet awareness that says, even if nothing is in your control, you are still not alone. And this is where your dua becomes more powerful than ever before. Not because your life is perfect, but because your heart is finally speaking from truth instead of habit. And if you are in this stage, understand something carefully. This is not weakness. This is not emotional instability. This is your heart learning how to rely on the one who never leaves it. And once this kind of connection forms, it changes everything that comes after it. When you realize you are not in control, no matter how much you try, there is a stage in life where something very deep starts breaking inside your sense of control. Not your life itself, but your belief that you are fully in control of your life. At first, you do not notice it clearly. You keep trying, you keep planning, you keep pushing forward with everything you have. You think if you just try a little harder, if you just think a little smarter, if you just manage things a little better, then everything will eventually align. But life slowly starts responding differently. You make plans, and they shift. You wait for outcomes, and they delay. You expect doors to open, and they stay closed for longer than you imagined. You try to fix things, and they do not fully get fixed. Not because you are not capable, but because something deeper is teaching you that control is not what you thought it was. And this realization does not come all at once. It comes in layers. First, you feel frustration. Then you feel confusion. Then you feel exhaustion. And finally, if you are honest with yourself, you begin to feel surrender forming inside you, even if you do not fully understand it yet. This is not surrender in the sense of giving up. This is surrender in the sense of finally recognizing reality. Because when Allah wants to elevate a person spiritually, one of the most important lessons He teaches them is that their control is limited. Not to break them, but to free them. Because a heart that believes everything depends on its own effort carries a burden it was never meant to carry. You start realizing that effort alone does not guarantee outcomes. Planning alone does not guarantee results. Desire alone does not guarantee timing. And this realization slowly shifts something inside you. At first, it feels uncomfortable, because you are used to relying on your actions, your thinking, your decisions. But now you are being shown that there is a higher system working beyond what you can see. And this is where something very important begins to develop inside you. Trust. Not blind hope, not emotional escape, but trust that is built through experience. You start remembering moments where things did not go your way, but later you realize they were protected for you. You start noticing delays that saved you from outcomes you did not understand at that time. You start seeing that not everything that did not happen was loss. Sometimes it was protection. Sometimes it was timing. Sometimes it was redirection. And slowly, your heart starts loosening its grip on control. You still make effort. You still take action. You still move forward in life. But your internal state begins to change. You are no longer emotionally attached to controlling every outcome. You are no longer mentally exhausted by trying to predict everything. You are no longer spiritually burdened by needing everything to happen exactly your way, because now something deeper is forming inside you. Acceptance of Allah's plan. And this acceptance does not make you passive. It makes you balanced. You work, but you are not destroyed by results. You try, but you are not crushed by delays. You plan, but you are not shaken by changes. And this is a very different way of living. Because before this stage, every outcome felt like a reflection of your worth. But now, outcomes feel like part of a plan you are not fully meant to understand, but are meant to trust. And in this trust, something very powerful happens inside the heart. Pressure begins to reduce, anxiety begins to soften, restlessness begins to settle. Not because life becomes easier, but because your dependence shifts. And when dependence shifts from control to Allah, the heart becomes lighter even when life remains the same. This is why this stage feels so transformative. Not because everything changes externally, but because everything changes internally. You stop asking, why is this not in my control? And slowly you start understanding, maybe it was never meant to be. And that understanding is not defeat, it is liberation. Because once you accept that your role is effort and Allah's role is outcome, your heart stops fighting battles it was never meant to fight. And this is where spiritual elevation becomes real, not in what you own, not in what you achieve, but in how peacefully you can walk through uncertainty without losing your connection with Allah. And if you are in this stage, understand something very clearly. Losing control is not the end of your story. It is the beginning of your dependence on the one who was always in control. When your heart starts longing for something this world cannot explain, there is a stage in your life that is very quiet, but very deep. On the outside, nothing may look different. You are still living your normal life. You are still doing your normal activities. You are still moving through your normal routines. But inside, something begins to change in a way you cannot fully describe. You start feeling a kind of longing that has no clear name. It is not just success you want. It is not just relationships. It is not just comfort or stability. It is something deeper than all of that. Something that cannot be fully explained in words, but can be felt very clearly in the heart. It feels like your soul is searching for something it remembers but cannot see. And this feeling does not come from confusion. It comes from awakening, because when Allah wants to elevate a person spiritually, He does not only remove distractions, He also places within the heart a desire that the dunya cannot satisfy. Not to frustrate you, but to guide you. Because a heart that is fully satisfied with the world will never look beyond it. But a heart that starts feeling incomplete within the world begins to search for something greater than it. And this is where this longing begins to grow. You may notice that even when good things happen, they do not fully fill you the way you expected. You achieve something, but the satisfaction is temporary. You experience something new, but the emptiness returns again. You reach goals, but your heart feels like it is missing something deeper. And slowly, you start realizing that what you are searching for is not something the world can fully give. This is not sadness, this is direction, because Allah is slowly shifting your heart away from dependence on temporary fulfillment and towards something eternal. And this is where reflection becomes stronger. You start thinking differently. You start questioning more deeply. You start becoming more aware of your inner world than your outer achievements. You start realizing that peace is not just in having things, but in feeling connected while having them. And this connection becomes the real desire. Not just success, not just love, not just stability, but meaning, closeness, peace that does not disappear when circumstances change. And even though you cannot fully define it, your heart knows exactly what it is searching for. Because it was created for something beyond what this world can offer. And that is why nothing fully satisfies you anymore the way it used to. Not because life is empty, but because your heart is being expanded. And expansion always feels like emptiness before it becomes clarity. So you may feel like something is missing, but in reality something is being prepared inside you. A deeper awareness, a stronger dependence, a clearer direction. And slowly, without forcing it, your heart begins to turn away from what is temporary and begin to lean toward what is eternal. Not perfectly, not instantly, but consistently in small moments you do not always notice. And if you are feeling this longing right now, understand something very important. You are not being left behind. You are being called towards something higher than what you have known so far. Because when a heart starts longing for what the world cannot explain, it is often because Allah is preparing that heart for a closeness the world was never meant to provide. Oh Allah, if you are pulling my heart away from this world, then do not leave me lost in it. Guide me to what pleases you, soften my heart for your remembrance, and make me steady on your path, even when I do not understand your plan. Keep me close to you, and never let my heart become distant from you, not even for a moment. Ameen.